Lately, it seems if Australians aren't fighting bushfires, they're battling floodwaters. These extreme weather events are predicted to become both more frequent and more severe, with the impact of climate change posing complex planning questions for all levels of government. In coastal areas, it's predicted around 250,000 Australian homes will be at risk from rising sea levels and increased storm surges. But so far, the courts seem to be making the hard decisions, with a recent Victorian ruling shattering one family's dream and potentially threatening hundreds of millions of dollars of coastal development. Lisa Whitehead reports.
With its pristine beaches and picture postcard scenery, the tranquil environment of Lake's Entrance is a mecca for tourists and retirees. But a storm is brewing over the Victorian town's future.
We're at a point where it's become almost impossible to predict what can or cannot be built.
4 years ago, local painting contractor Frank Strinny and his family bought this rundown waterfront house and the adjacent vacant lot with a plan to build 8 townhouses.
As you can see around the area, there's developments like this all on both sides of the spit.
The local shire and the Catchment Management Authority initially approved the Strinny family's application to build.
Technically, all your building areas above sea level rise.
But after an objection was lodged, the case ended up before Victoria's Peak Planning Tribunal, VCAT. In a decision that sent shockwaves through the town, the tribunal revoked the permit. It was highly critical of the council, saying it had essentially ignored the risks to the development from predicted sea level rise and the impact of climate change.
We're just in disbelief, really. And it's the same as the community here, they say the same thing. Just a lack of, just a disbelief in the whole process of it.
Effectively what it's done is it really has taken the economic certainty and the investment certainty out of these towns.
It's the latest in a number of landmark court decisions around the country, blocking development based on the impact of climate change. In Victoria, it's the first time a small-scale development has been knocked back. The East Gippsland Shire claims the ruling lacks common sense.
The decision to not allow something to happen today because of something that might happen in 90 years' time is a bit like having a sledgehammer to crack a walnut.
3 hours' drive east of Melbourne, Lake's Entrance sits on a man-made channel, linking it to the Gippsland Lakes on one side and Bass Strait on the other, making it vulnerable to inundation. This photograph shows the Strinny property surrounded by floodwaters 3 years ago.
It's a flood-prone area due to not just water coming up over the low-lying land, but also due to some infrastructure issues, like, for example, the stormwater layer. The stormwater acts as a conduit for the floodwaters to flow into the inner townscape area.
A Monash University research project modelled predictions of what could happen to the town as sea levels rise. The Strinny's proposed floor heights were above the existing flood level, and they'd added another 80 centimetres to account for predicted sea level rise by the year 2100. But the tribunal ruled this wasn't enough, saying the development could still pose a risk to residents and emergency personnel, and this low-lying area shouldn't be built up any further.
Even if you build it above the 2100 level, you can't build because of the infrastructure, the plumbing, the power and the other underground facilities that you put in place. They're also saying that you can't increase the capacity of the block. There's a real projection going forward that towns like this will look pretty tired in 20 years' time.
The tribunal criticised the East Gippsland Shire for deferring the difficult decisions when it said the Victorian government had clearly directed planning authorities to consider the impact of climate change. But the council CEO says it can't be expected to go it alone.
The level of information and guidance by governments for councils isn't complete in regards to how sea level rise ought to be dealt with. And it's not simply the case that council can blindly put a line around a map and say, we think this might be vulnerable, but we're not quite sure.
Alan Stokes, chair of the National Sea Change Task Force representing Australia's coastal councils, says its members are caught between a rock and a hard place.
The councils are damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. If they issue a permit, then that permit is likely to be challenged before the Appeals Tribunal or the Land and Environment Court. If they don't issue a permit, then that refusal is also likely to be subject to a legal challenge.
Last month, New South Wales became the first state to introduce detailed coastal planning laws. Councils are urged to reject development and rezoning in defined at-risk areas, with the New South Wales government warning those who ignore the guidelines do so at their peril.
Councils that do not take in good faith consideration of those risks associated with those hazards, yes, they're likely to be seen to be liable in the future, and that's a major issue for councils.
It is a very difficult issue for the courts to deal with. It's equally a very difficult issue for local councils in coastal areas to deal with, because they're daily faced with having to make decisions which would impact on development in these areas.
The Victorian government is expected to follow New South Wales and release its coastal planning laws by the end of the year. But coastal councils are also calling for the federal government to act. A parliamentary report into the impact of climate change on coastal communities was delivered late last year, making 47 recommendations.
We sincerely hope that they will respond to these recommendations as a matter of urgency, because the communities of coastal Australia are depending on it.
One of the reasons for the slow evolution of planning laws to deal with climate change is because inevitably there will be some big losers.
This is one of the difficulties that our society will face, and it will not just be those at Lakes Entrance, it will be in many, many parts of Australia, and it will become more and more evident as time goes on that the cost will have to be borne by society as a whole, but particular landowners.
The Strinny family has already spent $600,000 on interest payments, planning costs and legal fees, with no prospect of compensation and no certainty about the future.
Ethically, I can't sell it. I mean, it's worth realistically nothing at the moment, so I mean, it wouldn't be just to sell a property that knowing that at the end of the day you can't do anything with.
That report from Lisa Whitehead.